This story isn't about revenge. It's about clarity, the moment when illusion ends and a man sees his life for what it truly is. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 46, a construction foreman based out of Fort Worth, Texas. I've been married for 23 years to a woman I once believed I knew down to her soul. We raised our daughter, Madison, in a modest, well-kept house on the outskirts of the city. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Built with sweat and sacrifice. My days were long, spent under the Texan sun, managing sites, guiding crews, making sure projects didn't just get done, but done right. It started like any other Monday. The burnt smell of coffee, the quiet shuffle of newspapers, a few precious moments before another workday. But that morning my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Reed? This is Arlington General Hospital. Your daughter Madison has been admitted to the ER. You should come immediately. That drive, 30 minutes of silence except the thrum of the old engine, felt like hours. When I saw her, bruised and trembling in that hospital bed, everything in me twisted. She whispered, "I came home early from Erica's. I heard voices. Mom was upstairs. With someone." Her voice cracked on the last word. I waited. She didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. I stayed calm for her. Madison needed tests. X-rays. I made sure she was taken care of, but inside me, something old stirred. I hadn't worn a uniform in 20 years, but I remembered exactly how it felt to prepare for something serious. My tools were different now, but the mission? That hadn't changed. I called an old contact from my military days, Mac, now a private investigator in Houston. I said, "I need everything you can dig up on Derek Bishop. Financials. Associates. The whole shadow." Then I called a detective I trusted, Ramirez. A quiet man who owed me a favor from years back. I told him, "This isn't just family drama. This goes deeper." "Private location? Good. I'll bring evidence." That night, I sat by Madison's bed. She was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I studied her face, remembering the night she was born. Back then I had promised her I would be her shield. That promise hadn't expired. Not now. Not ever. I stepped outside the room. My voice was steady as I called a locksmith. I said, "Tomorrow morning. Change every lock. Front and back. Don't care what it costs." I wasn't sure what I would find in the days ahead, but I knew one thing: they'd all underestimated the quiet man who builds things with his hands. Including payback. By the time the sun crawled up over Fort Worth the next morning, I'd already been awake for hours, sitting in the same chair beside Madison's hospital bed. Her breathing was easier now, her face a little less pale. The nurses told me she'd likely be discharged in a day or two. But the damage had already been done, and not just to her ribs. I drove straight from the hospital to my office. I didn't speak to anyone. My site managers knew better than to ask questions when I walked in with that expression. I locked my door, closed the blinds, and opened the folder Mac had sent me overnight. What I saw made my knuckles go white. Derek Bishop wasn't just a man with bad judgment. He was tangled up in shady land deals from Arizona to Louisiana. Lawsuits, non-disclosure settlements, silent partners from offshore accounts. But what froze my blood was the deed to a commercial lot, one I recognized. It was listed under a trust. And that trust had my wife's signature as co-executor. I called Mac. I said, "How deep is she in this?" He answered, "Deep. Looks like she's been funneling money from joint holdings into that trust for over a year. She's tied to Bishop legally, financially, and from what Madison said, personally." I said nothing. Just let the silence hang. He added, "Want me to keep digging?" I answered, "Dig until you hit rock or a body." I spent the rest of the day going through everything Max sent: bank transfers, wire records, emails. Somewhere between the fifth and sixth document, I noticed a detail. The trust had recently purchased a new property just outside of Houston. A house. Big, gated, quiet. That explained the missing funds. That explained the new wardrobe Eleanor had tried to pass off as sale finds. I called Ramirez. He said, "You got something for me?" I replied, "Names, dates, financial records. I want surveillance, full scope. Whatever you can do legally, or otherwise." He said, "Understood. You still calm?" I answered, "Calm enough to be dangerous." That night I didn't go home. I stayed in a motel off I-35, the kind with humming vending machines and plastic-wrapped remotes. I didn't want to risk seeing Eleanor yet, not until I had the full picture. Instead, I pulled out a notebook, drew a timeline, marked out the patterns, cross-referenced every known appearance of Derek in Fort Worth with family events, holidays, even school meetings Madison had. And that's when it hit me. Derek had been there for Madison's birthday last year. Eleanor had insisted he stay the weekend. She said, "He hasn't seen her in so long." I'd been working overtime on a road project outside Abilene. I wrote one word under that date, covered. The next evening, I went back to the house. Not to talk. To observe. She was home. Kitchen lights on. A glass of wine in hand. Same old Eleanor, or the version of her I used to think I knew. I didn't go in. Just sat in the truck across the street and watched. And then I saw it, her phone lit up. She smiled. She said too softly to hear, but I knew that smile. That was not a friend's smile. I watched her step out on the porch. She looked up and down the street like a woman expecting someone. And that's when a black sedan rolled up. Out stepped Derek. He didn't knock. He used a key. I gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought it might snap. I stayed parked, headlights off. Watched the door close behind him. I didn't move for a long time. I said to myself quietly, "This isn't just betrayal. This is planning. This is legacy theft. This is war." And tomorrow, I was going to make the first move. But just before I pulled away, the porch light flicked on again, and Eleanor stepped outside, phone in hand, scanning the street. She looked straight at my truck. And she didn't blink. She looked straight at my truck. And she didn't blink. I didn't flinch either. I kept my gaze fixed, my body frozen behind the windshield like a man buried alive in his own quiet war. We stared across the street like two adversaries who'd finally taken off the masks. She held the phone to her ear, lips moving. Then she turned back into the house. The porch light clicked off. I drove off slowly, without headlights, circled the block once, then parked 2 streets down under a dead oak. I waited another hour, engine off. At 10:42 p.m., Derek walked out. Alone. He didn't look around. Just got into his car and drove east. I followed. At a distance. He took the back roads out of Fort Worth, wound his way down I-45, exited into a gated property near Conroe. Security cameras. Electric gate. Remote access. The same address tied to that trust Mac had dug up. So that was it. The new life. My life, stripped and repurposed. The next morning, I picked up Madison from the hospital. She was quiet, her eyes tired but alert. She said, "Are we going home?" I answered, "Not just yet." We drove to my brother's place in Denton. I trusted Caleb. He was a school teacher, lived alone, didn't ask many questions. When we pulled into his driveway, he met us at the porch. He said, "Thought you might show up. Madison, come on inside. I made pancakes." She smiled, the first real one since this started. Caleb and I stood outside after she went in. He said, "How bad is it, Tom?" I answered, "Worse than I thought." He said, "What do you need from me?" I replied, "Just this. Safety. Time. And silence." He nodded, clapped my shoulder. That was enough. I spent the next 2 days between Caleb's back room and Ramirez's office. We had surveillance running on both properties, my old house and Derek's hideout. I reviewed footage, timelines, phone records. cross-checked Eleanor's financial access with dates when shared funds vanished. She'd been withdrawing in increments, small enough to avoid alarms, but regular enough to build a separate life. Hotels in Austin, cash deposits in Galveston, even a rental SUV she used on weekends. I thought she was at a spa retreat with old friends. I sat across from Ramirez. He said, "We have her. Legally, financially. You want to press charges?" I answered, "Not yet. I want to understand the endgame. You don't build this kind of lie unless you've got an exit plan." He leaned back, arms crossed. He said, "You think she's going to disappear?" I said, "Not just disappear. She's going to try and erase me." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. I continued, "There's a will. A life insurance policy. 2 retirement accounts. All in flux. I checked yesterday. She changed the primary beneficiary on the house just 2 weeks ago." He said, "To Bishop?" I nodded. He said, "You're still alive." "She can't," I interrupted. "She doesn't need to kill me. Just force me out. If I look unstable, violent, custody gone, house gone. Reputation wrecked." Ramirez was quiet. Then he said, "What's your next move?" I answered, "I let her make the first mistake. Then I show her I've already made mine. And survived it." That night, I went back to the house. She was alone. I didn't knock. Just opened the door with my old key, stepped inside. She turned from the kitchen, wineglass in hand. She said, "You shouldn't be here." I answered, "It's still my house. My name's still on the title. My daughter's name's still on the mailbox." She set the glass down, slowly. She said, "You're scaring me." I replied, "Not yet. But you should start being honest. Where's the paperwork? Where's the trust folder?" She tried to move past me. I didn't block her, but I didn't move either. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "You do. You've known for over a year. You and Derek planned this. You weren't just having an affair. You were rewriting the ending. Without me." Her eyes flickered. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "That depends. Do you want the civilized version or the one you tried to push me toward?" She didn't answer. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. Just let it close behind me. When I got back to the motel, there was a message waiting on my burner phone. A single line, no sender. "You should have stayed gone." And I knew then, it wasn't just Eleanor and Derek anymore. Someone else had joined the game. The message on the burner phone read, "You should have stayed gone." I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering above the delete key. But I didn't delete it. I forwarded it to Ramirez, saved a screenshot, and powered the device down. Then I opened the window of my motel room, let the air hit my face, and stood there in silence. Someone else was watching. Someone I hadn't seen. The next morning, I drove back to Denton. Caleb was in the yard with Madison, showing her how to change spark plugs on his old Ford. She looked better, more herself. But there was still a tension behind her smile. A girl who'd been hurt, and now didn't know where safety lived anymore. I said, "Caleb, can we talk inside?" He followed me into the kitchen. I showed him the message. He said, "Is it a threat?" I answered, "It's a warning. Someone's afraid I'm getting too close." He said, "Do you think it's Derek?" I shook my head. I said, "No. This isn't his tone. Derek's arrogant, not subtle. This is someone who operates in the dark." Ramirez called while we were talking. I stepped out onto the porch. He said, "Got something. Surveillance footage from the Conroe property. Late delivery last week. Large package unmarked. Truck registered to a dissolved shell company in Nevada." I said, "Anything inside?" He said, "No label, no record of what it was. But here's the thing, 2 hours after delivery, Derek left. Alone. Then returned 12 hours later, without explanation." I replied, That sounds like a transfer. Moving something, or someone. Ramirez said. You want me to go in? I said. Not yet. Keep watching. Let me see if they blink. That afternoon, I drove to a storage facility I hadn't visited in 10 years. Inside was an old gun safe, a dusty duffel, and 3 weathered journals. Things from my deployment days. Notes, routines, field sketches, and a set of backup credentials from my last overseas contract. I packed light. 1 change of clothes. The journals. A tactical flashlight. And the Glock I hadn't touched since 2008. I checked into a new motel under a different name, in a different county. Then I called Mac. I said, I need a list. People Eleanor and Derek could be working with. Associates, contractors, financial proxies. Anyone they've contacted in the last 6 months. He said, You're building a map? I answered, No. I'm building a perimeter. 2 days passed. Then Madison came to me. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. She said, Dad, there's something I didn't tell you. I looked at her steady. I said, Go ahead. She said, That night, when I heard them, I didn't just hear voices. I heard Mom say something. I didn't understand it at the time. But now, it won't leave my head. I waited. She said, He won't be a problem much longer. Derek's got it covered. I felt my stomach turn, but kept my face still. I asked, Are you sure? She nodded. She said, I heard it clearly. I thought maybe it was about the divorce or money. But now? I don't know. I stood up, crossed the room. I said, You did the right thing telling me. She asked, Are we safe? I looked at her for a long time. I answered, Not yet. But we will be. That night, Ramirez called again. He said, One of our guys caught sight of a third person at Eleanor's house. Male, mid-50s, heavy-set, drives a Yukon with dealer plates. Left 5 minutes after Derek. I asked, You get a plate? He said, Ran it. Belongs to a dealership that specializes in fleet sales to private security firms. I didn't say anything. Just felt the weight drop into my chest. Ramirez said, They're circling you, Tom. Carefully. Like they're waiting for a mistake. I said, Then it's time I give them one. But on my terms. That same night, I returned to the house, not through the front door. I moved in through the dark, past the back gate, under the creaking fence Eleanor never bothered to fix. And from the shadows, I watched her hand over a sealed envelope to a man I'd never seen before, who carried a gun under his jacket. The man Eleanor met that night didn't look like a banker. Didn't move like a friend. He took the envelope, scanned the street once, then tucked it under his jacket. The bulge on his right side didn't shift. Glock 19. I knew the profile. I stayed low, waited until they both disappeared inside. I recorded what I could, grainy video, timestamped. Enough for Ramirez. The next morning, I met him in person. Neutral ground. A parking lot behind a closed-down outlet mall off I-30. No cameras, no foot traffic. I handed over the flash drive. He said, This isn't just about property or divorce anymore. She's meeting armed contractors. That envelope's not alimony. I answered, I know. That's why we accelerate. He said, You want me to pull in federal partners? I said, Not yet. We're not there. But keep your team close. I'm about to test the line. That afternoon, I visited my attorney. Her name was Valerie Finch, sharp, ruthless, and expensive. She said, You've been quiet. I assumed you weren't going to fight for anything. I said, I wasn't. Until now. Now I want everything. She blinked, straightened in her seat. She said, Define everything. I said, Full custody. Primary house. My pension intact. Her frozen assets identified. I want this wrapped airtight. She said, Do you have leverage? I slid the manila folder across the table. Photos, bank statements, footage stills. The last sheet was the trust agreement with Eleanor's signature, dated and notarized. She said, "How did you get all this?" I replied, "Does it matter?" She looked me in the eye. She said, "You realize if this is accurate, we're not just talking divorce court. We're talking fraud, conspiracy, endangerment if we push hard enough." I nodded. She said, "Then buckle up. This just became war." That night I called Caleb. He said, "Everything okay?" I answered, "Not yet. But we're almost ready. Keep Madison close. Don't let her out of sight. If anything seems off, you call Ramirez directly." He said, "Is it that bad?" I answered, "It's worse. They're panicking." The next morning, the locks on the old house were changed again. Eleanor had finally responded to the motion Finch filed, by cutting off my access. No call, no warning. Just deadbolts and silence. That was fine. I didn't need the house. I needed the pressure. Over the next 48 hours, Ramirez tracked movement between Eleanor, Derek, and the third man, identified now as Martin Glass, ex-private military, discharged under a cloud, now running security consulting for a select clientele with cash, not conscience. "Max sent me a dossier," he said. "Glass doesn't take jobs unless there's threat involved. High-value asset extraction, usually. Or intimidation." I said, "So either they think I'm dangerous, or they're planning something." He said, "Could be both." That evening, Madison came to me again. Her face pale, voice trembling. She said, "Dad, I think someone followed me yesterday. At the pharmacy. I saw the same SUV 3 times. I froze. I asked, "Was Caleb with you?" She said, "No. I just went in for 5 minutes. But when I came out, it was parked across from the exit. A black Yukon. Same model from your photo." I closed my eyes for a moment. Then stood. I said, "Okay. New rules. From now on, no errands alone. Not even to the mailbox. We're changing location." Caleb said, "I've got a buddy with a farm near Wichita Falls. Remote. Secure." I answered, "Perfect. We leave at dawn." Before we left, I made one final stop. Back to Eleanor's. This time in broad daylight. I rang the doorbell. She answered. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "To look you in the eye one last time before it all falls apart." She laughed. She said, "You think you're winning this? You think your little games will stop anything?" I said, "I think I've already won. You just haven't felt it yet." She stepped forward, voice sharp. She said, "You think you're a martyr? A victim? You were never present. You buried yourself in work and left the rest to rot. I had to survive." I nodded slowly. I said, "Then you should have chosen honesty. Instead, you chose silence and shadows." She didn't reply. As I turned to leave, a second car pulled into the driveway. Derek behind the wheel. And in the back seat, visible only for a moment, sat Madison's school counselor, bound, gagged, eyes wide with panic. And I realized, this wasn't about me anymore. They were sending a message. The image of Madison's school counselor bound in Derek's back seat burned into my brain like a scar. I didn't react in the moment. I just turned, walked to my truck, and drove off as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was fire and wire. I called Ramirez from the first stoplight. I said, "They've escalated. Kidnapping. They're trying to provoke me." He said, "You sure it was her?" I replied, "She had a name tag on. Susan Talley." Eyes pleading. He cursed under his breath. He said, "We're going to need more than surveillance. We need a warrant fast." I answered, "You won't get one in time. Not without evidence of immediate harm. And you know they'll clean house the moment they feel pressure." He was silent a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do, Tom?" I replied, "Exactly what they're daring me to. But smarter. That night I called Mac. I said, I need blueprints of Derek's Conroe property. Entry points, camera lines, blind spots. He said, already sent. Also pinged you a map of known security rotations based on deliveries. They're predictable. I said, they think I'm desperate. Time to let them keep thinking that. The next day, Caleb took Madison to the safe farm near Wichita Falls. They left before dawn in a borrowed car, without phones. I watched them go, my heart tight but steady. Then I changed vehicles, IDs, and location. At 8 p.m., I parked across from the Conroe compound. Used a trail I'd mapped from satellite images. I crossed through brush and drainage ditches, keeping to the shadows. 25 minutes later, I was inside the perimeter. Hidden. I waited. Watched. At 9:13 p.m., Derek exited the back door, cell to ear. He said, no, he doesn't have the guts. He'll fold. Pause. He said, just hold her till Friday. After that, it's clean. We walk away. He stepped back inside. I recorded every word. I messaged Ramirez. Got audio. Confirmed hostage. Countdown active. He replied, we're moving. 36 hours max. I stayed hidden until nearly 2 a.m., then exfiltrated the way I came. Every muscle in my body burned, but my mind was colder than ice. There was no more doubt. This wasn't just betrayal. This was dismantling. They were trying to erase me and erase anyone who could speak the truth. At sunrise, I met Valerie Finch. She said, you look like you haven't slept in a week. I said, I haven't. But we're close. I need to force Eleanor's hand. She said, you want her to confess? I replied, I want her to panic. To show her teeth before she can hide the blood. She leaned forward. She said, then we file an emergency injunction. Leak the financials anonymously to the state fraud unit. Freeze the trust. Force a response. I nodded. That afternoon we filed. By nightfall, Eleanor called me. She said, you've gone too far. You think this scares me? I answered, no. But it scares your partner. And he's the one holding the real secrets. She hesitated. She said, you have no idea what you're walking into. I said, then enlighten me. Or I keep walking. She hung up. 2 hours later, Ramirez called. He said, we got movement. Derek's burning files. Looks like a dump site east of Conroe. I said, follow. From distance. No engagement. He replied, understood. We've also tracked Glass. He's prepping gear. Discreet but urgent. I said, what's the timeline? He answered, 12 hours. Maybe less. I hung up. Then I opened my journal. Wrote a note for Madison. Just in case. I said aloud, to the empty room. You won't grow up afraid. Not because of them. Not while I still breathe. At 3:41 a.m., my phone buzzed once. Mac's message. Surveillance just went dark. All cams at Conroe property offline. They weren't hiding anymore. They were moving. 3:41 a.m. Mac's message flashed across my phone screen. Surveillance just went dark. All cams at Conroe property offline. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my pack, my old sidearm, the throwaway phone, and I left the safe house. Roads were empty, headlights cutting through fog as I drove toward what could have been the end, or the beginning of the real fight. Half an hour later, I parked 2 streets away from the Conroe compound. I cut across the side fence again. This time, there was no dog, no movement, no lights. Too quiet. That's when I knew this wasn't just panic. It was a purge. At 4:28 a.m., I entered through the garage, unlocked. Inside, faint diesel smell. The air had a strange weight. In the den, furniture was overturned, drawers emptied. They'd left in a hurry. Or staged it to look that way. I found Susan Talley in a back room, tied to a chair. Breathing, conscious, eyes wide. I knelt in front of her. I said, "I'm Tom Reed. I'm here to help." She whispered, "They're not far. He said they were going to disappear after the extraction." I cut her loose. She said, "You're risking everything." I answered, "Then I'm risking it right." We left the house through the side door. I called Ramirez on the move. I said, "I've got the hostage. They're relocating. Need immediate pickup." He said, "ETA 5 minutes. You armed?" I replied, "Always." We waited in the shadows of a loading dock across the street. I kept the gun down, eyes up. When Ramirez's SUV rolled in, I handed Susan over and said nothing more. He nodded, no questions. Then I went back. The property was already on fire. I stood across the street, watching the flames spread through the roofline. Fire trucks hadn't arrived. No alarms. No neighbors. It was like the place never existed. They were erasing everything, including themselves. By noon, we had warrants in place. Valerie moved fast, locking Eleanor's remaining assets. Derek's accounts were frozen. Glass's name pinged on a no-fly list. And the federal team took over the deeper layers: tax fraud, conspiracy, endangerment. But I didn't go home. I went to the hospital. Susan needed care, and Madison needed answers. I said to her, "They're gone. Not just hiding, destroyed." She said, "What happens now?" I answered, "We rebuild. From the ground up. Not the house. The truth." In the following weeks, the case made headlines. Quietly, deliberately. No dramatic courtroom scenes. No cameras. Just filings, seizures, official statements. Eleanor tried to contact me once. A letter. No return address. She wrote, "I thought I could outrun it. I didn't know you'd still fight." I never wrote back. 1 month later, I stood in the new place, a rental, modest, with clean lines and old oaks outside. Madison painted her room blue. Said it felt like air. Caleb came by. Dropped off tools, shook my hand without a word. Ramirez visited once, too. He said, "You kept your hands clean. That's rare." I answered, "I didn't want justice. I wanted peace." He nodded. He said, "You earned it." So now I wake early, still drink burnt coffee. But the silence feels different. Not hollow. Just honest. I lost a lot. But I didn't lose myself. And in the end, that's what they never understood. They thought I'd break. But I build. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real emotion, real men. Men who don't scream. They act. Coldly. All the way to the end.